Welcome to Event Experience by Bizzabo, the podcast where we bring the best and brightest event experience leaders together to share stories, tips, and lessons learned from creating some of the world's biggest events. I'm Rachel Moore, your podcast host. In this episode, you'll get an infusion of insight for your own events industry career as we follow the journey of Leslie Hitchcock-Stone, co-founder of Resilience Conference. We'll explore her work at TechCrunch and the importance of events in the startup world, and proceed into how her idea for Resilience Conference came about. Whether your goal is to craft events for your favorite brand or create your own mission-driven conference, you'll gain a clearer vision for your personal event experience. Let's go. From revolutionizing TechCrunch into a media brand to founding a new conference in business, the key word for today's guest is resilience. We're about to click into a truly expansive career in the events industry with co-founder of the premier startup Resilience Conference, Leslie Hitchcock. Leslie, welcome to Event Experience.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you across microphones. And I always do that super brief, high level introduction of our guests, but we're going to learn so much more about you today, starting with what are your go-to on the ground event day shoes?
So I'm a bit of a shoe fan. And so there's a brand I like very, very much that's based in New York, and it's called Tibi, T-I-B-I. And they have this style of shoe called the Rudolph. And it is so comfortable, and it can be dressed up or dressed down. And I absolutely love it. So that's one. And then the other are my low profile New Balances. And those can go with a suit or anything, a dress, anything. They're so comfortable. So depending on the length of the event, meaning number of days, that's what I go for.
Excellent. Awesome. Next thing I'm going to have to start asking people, okay, and then what's your suitcase of choice? Because you have to pack all these shoes.
Oh, right.
That's the next, maybe that's next season. I'll be like, okay, your favorite suitcase, your favorite travel bag. All right. Is there anything that you're listening to, watching, or reading these days that you can't put down?
Yes. So like I mentioned, I like to do a lot of learning. So I've recently subscribed to Foreign Affairs magazine. It's not for everyone. It can be very disconcerting, but for me, in really beginning to understand or continuing my learnings about the foreign policies and how they affect democracies and things like that, I read that a lot. I also read this amazing book that I can't shut up about, which is This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends by Nicole Perlroth. She wrote it in 2019, which is why it completely missed my radar because I was on maternity leave then, and then there was a global pandemic, and I wasn't really paying attention to a lot at that point. But she was the cyber reporter for the New York Times for quite some time. And she's written a book, and it is amazing and also a little scary. And then what I listen to, I just love Ezra Klein's podcast. I love his podcast in the New York Times, the Ezra Klein Show. I just find he's one of my favorite thinkers. That's the best way I can describe him. He's got a lot of really interesting things to say. And when he doesn't know what to say, he brings on the right people to educate him and his listeners. And I really admire that about him.
That's really cool. Yeah. Can you expand a little bit more on what your role is as a co-founder of Resilience Conference? And I know I said the word resilience a couple times in your intro, but it seems applicable. So what's your world like as the co-founder of Resilience Conference?
It's very, very busy. But what's interesting is that's not any different from any other event. So, and this is when people find out, who I'm meeting for the first time, what I've done in my career, like, oh gosh, I've done events, but they're nothing like that. I'm like, no, actually an event is an event is an event. It doesn't matter if it is a 10-person dinner or a 10,000 person conference or a 100,000 person festival. You still have to go through the same operational experience and anxiety to pull it off. So I never want to, to belittle what people are doing, but least of all myself. So I spent 10 years at TechCrunch, which is the publication of record for the startup and technology industry. And I absolutely loved my time there. I wore a variety of hats during my tenure there, but the most exciting one was the director of global events, which I did for the last 6 years that I was at the company. I came on board originally as their marketer, their very first marketing hire. And my second week on the job was TechCrunch Disrupt New York 2011, and they flew me out for it. and with the expectation that I would be working while I was there, whatever that meant. And TechCrunch was such a tiny team at the time that everybody chipped in for the event. So you'd find yourself gaffing the session hall floor next to Heather Hardy, who, used to run Fox Business and then was the CEO of TechCrunch.
Wow.
Because that's what we did. We just all chipped in. But I got to TechCrunch Disrupt New York 2011, and I walked around this vast event space. It was in a pier on the Hudson River. I thought, this is a job? It was so amazing, so magical. But it never occurred to me to potentially move into it, into events as a career. I just considered it a perk in my time as the marketer at TechCrunch. But, I got to know the events business pretty well because in my marketing capacity, I was working around audience development and sales collateral and unifying messages, which they hadn't actually been able to do in their first 5 years as a business because it was very small. Yeah. What I'm doing now is very, very small. And so then when the opportunity came, I moved to the events team. And I first started as a sponsorship salesperson. And I firmly believe that if you want somebody to understand a product or to lead a business unit or a company, they need to sell it first. And so I cut my teeth first, really building out the sponsorship of the TechCrunch Disrupt hackathons and then the conferences, and just really had an amazing time bringing together the startup world and the sponsors and just seeing that magic that happened. And it sounds really funny to say it like that, but I absolutely believed it. I mean, I was at TechCrunch for nearly 10 years. And at about 7 years in, I thought to myself, why am I still here? Because at this day and age, that's a very long time to stay somewhere. And it was the people. I absolutely loved the people. And I'll speak more on that with regards to Resilience Conference. But also what I actually realized, and this was in the work in the last few years that I was at TechCrunch, I ran the international events business at that point because I had moved to London. That's where I live now. I've been here for 8 years, and I developed all of the international presence that TechCrunch did from there. And going to other startup ecosystems outside of San Francisco, outside of London, outside of New York, and seeing the problems that they were solving and what a special thing it was to have TechCrunch come to those locations and to kind of shine that light on them. I realized that ultimately what I loved about the work that TechCrunch does is that it was altruistic at its heart. And we had the ability to really make a company's entire, existence with a blog post. And that was a really special thing. I didn't take it lightly. And so, I say all of that. You asked me about resilience, and I started with TechCrunch. That is the trajectory for me. When I left TechCrunch, I took a longer period of time off than I had anticipated because I left at the beginning of 2020, and I thought I would take a little bit of time off and then jump into whatever I wanted to do next. And I'd had a couple of offers that were event-based, but they all wanted me to start, kind of immediately. And I knew I needed some time. And so then the global pandemic happened, and I took a lot more time than I anticipated, but it was really good. And actually, because it allowed me to reset and think about what was important to me. Yeah. And so everything that I've done since I left TechCrunch has had that same mission-based ethos. Yeah. And the same, that can be said for Resilience Conference as well. So what is it like running it? It's very, very tiring. It's not my full-time gig, but it is a full-time gig. I'm doing other work in media and production for my actual job and co-founding it with my husband, which is also very interesting. He is a founder and investor, has worked in policy and in government. And so with the vision of Resilience Conference, it was the right thing for us to do, to work together.
That is quite, and we're absolutely going to dig more into this too, because that's quite a trajectory. And what's interesting is that everybody listening to this, no two career paths of an event professional are the same. I mean, they might have similarities, but certainly everybody's got their own, how they got introduced. I love how you describe, where you're like, wait, this is a job someone can get paid for, and then fell in love with that. Everybody's got their own origin story with how they got involved with the events industry itself. and then just, what kind of brands they work for. Obviously, TechCrunch is globally known, so it's really cool to be like, wow, hear about somebody who was able to be there, particularly during a turnaround point for it. And to have that kind of impact too, I want to double click on a couple things you said there too. One was where TechCrunch was built to such a large entity that, a single blog post could, change the fortunes, as it were, of any given company that you might be spotlighting. That power that can be wielded through that. But it was because you built a brand and you and your team were key to do that. I think just demonstrates to our listeners the possibility of what they can influence, right? I mean, of how they can change people's fortunes by the work they do.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a really great point.
Yeah. And I want to also say, as someone who abhors selling, I hate sales, and I work in marketing, so I can't really say that because it's like, well, you kind of are selling it. But I think that's super interesting too, to have that perspective of everybody who's planning an event. You really need to know, okay, I'm doing it for a product or service. There's something behind me that I'm planning events for. So having a really keen understanding. And I think too, would you say too, like if you're looking at it from a sales perspective, pain points, salespeople are always trying to be like, let me understand what your pain points are and then how we can solve them, right? I would imagine that has a lot of impact on, the understanding of running an event then.
Yeah, absolutely. I really did struggle actually with going into sales because as a marketer, I felt also a little bit more special than sales. So I see you there. And I talked to somebody who was the account director for TechCrunch just on the digital side. He also did event stuff, but he was like, Leslie, sales is just helping people. And I was like, oh, well, I like to help people. And that was really it. It was like, okay, here's what we have at TechCrunch. Here, this what I get most passionate about, and I still do to this day, is a hackathon. I just love the energy at a hackathon. I love the idea of something being new, built under enormous time constraints and people coming together who might not have otherwise. And just the building. I just love the building. And so, it was like, okay, well, we have 1,000 people coming to this hackathon. Here's the demographics. Here's what they've built in the past. One of my favorite stories, which is actually now it's a bit sad because the product's been absolutely ruined. But, GroupMe was born at TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon in 2010. And at that point, we have to go into the way back machine. But I am old enough to remember when text messaging cost a lot of money. And it was not the most economical way to communicate with people. Right. In fact, when you got a text message, you'd be like, why are you doing this to my cell phone bill?
Yes.
And so they built a platform that enabled circumventing using data to send messages to people. And it was born at that hackathon, and it ended up being acquired by Skype and now absolutely ruined by Microsoft, unfortunately. Yeah. And, great company, not great at everything. Totally fine. It happens. But that was the genesis for iMessage and WhatsApp and all sorts of stuff. And it came out of that hackathon. And so, telling those stories was always really exciting to me, and the potential. I've stayed in touch with this family in, I think it was 2013. There was a little girl, 2013 or 2014, a little girl named Alexandra Jordan, who is now a university student at the University of Exeter. And so I actually get to, stay in touch with her to this day and same time zone now. But she and her dad came and did a hack together. She did it. She programmed it. It was her older brother is autistic, and she wanted to find a way to be able to make play dates for him. And so she built a hack and she presented it on stage. And I talked with her about, about what I did and all this, we really got to know each other, and I stayed in touch with her dad. And then when she came to university here, they came over for dinner, and it was just really, really lovely. And she and I have since stayed in touch about some ideas that she has around how to build a hackathon in the Middle East to help with like regional stabilization and stuff like that. It's really, she's amazing, absolutely amazing. But that was not something I would have ever expected. Right. Out of my career. And that's what I really love about it.
Yeah. I thank you for that story too. And I love that point as well about, sales is just helping people. And at the end of the day, that's what we're all doing. We obviously there's business behind it and stuff, but you really are trying to be a person to another person and say, I have a solution for you. And I thank you for sharing about the hackathons as well, because this kind of segues to, you briefly touched on it earlier, kind of where your headspace was getting when you had been at TechCrunch for about 6 or 7 years. And you're like, okay, I'm starting to think about different things. I kind of want to ask you a little bit to expand on that a bit. Your tenure at TechCrunch, how did that prompt you to ultimately make that transition then to co-founding a new conference and business? I mean, I bet that hackathon has something to do with it, but what were some other things that kind of contributed to you making that transition?
Yeah. When I left TechCrunch, I thought, okay, door shut on my events career. I want to do other things. What else is out there? I was very concerned about being typecast and, all very silly in my head type stuff, to be perfectly honest with you. So I mentioned my husband's background and my background. What I didn't mention is that when Ukraine was invaded, we took it really, really hard as a family because in the early aughts, he had done economic development work in the Balkans, Ukraine, and the Baltic states. And he maintained relationships with these young people. We were all younger back then, 20 years younger. And now they are former heads of state, high up in policy, startup founders you've heard of, notable investors. And we were getting messages in real time when Ukraine was invaded about friends that were going into hiding, losing friends and family, being evacuated, moving country, and also pivoting their businesses in dramatic ways. Like one of our friends had a very successful business called Pet Cube that interchange your pets while you're not at home.
Wow.
And now he's doing really hardcore drone defense work.
Wow.
And has been since March of 2022. And we were talking about, at that point, the startup industry in the West was really reluctant to get involved in dual use technologies and more specifically, defense and security. So dual use is a technology or a product that can be used in both a consumer space and then also in another space that would deal with more with global conflict. So back in July of 2023, we noticed that this was a problem to us because of all of these people whose lived experiences we were party to. Yeah. And so what we did at that time was, talk about how do you legitimize what it is that Ukrainians are going through? How do you make it real for the startup industry? And I said, well, you get them a speaking spot at TechCrunch Disrupt. That's the world stage. Mm-hmm. Everyone's listening. Zelensky's wife, I'm not going to be able to say her name properly right now, but she spoke at Web Summit. This is a platform. Yeah. But if you want to talk to the startup industry, Disrupt is a great way to do it. And so we then teased that idea out and thought about doing it ourselves because of his background in policy and government and startups and investing, and then mine in the event space. But also I am a lifelong learner. If I don't know about something, I'm the type of person that will go and find a 500-page book about it and read and educate myself. And so, I've been following this conversation in the startup industry as well.
We'll be right back with more event experience after the break. From backstage to the spotlight, the Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo gives you a front row seat to the event industry's most captivating stories. Want to get more out of each episode? Visit bizzabo.com/podcast. That's bizzabo.com/podcast for show notes, transcripts, links, and resources mentioned in each episode, and more. The Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo, where events become unforgettable experiences. We're back with Leslie Hitchcock-Stone as she shares what prompted her to create a whole new conference called Resilience.
Your original question of what made me want to do it, it was mission driven. It's a motive for us. We are selling tickets and sponsorships for the conference because we want it to be sustainable, agile. We're already planning for Resilience too. This is, not just a one and done event. We want to build something meaningful out of this. But it was really a really important problem for us to highlight that, for example, in Ukraine, one of our friends said recently that everything for Ukraine is dual use. In a war, anything from energy to mental health apps, they become core to society's resilience and defense. And so we want to be able to, with this event, bring together groups that rarely meet. So many of the national security and government and policy people rarely leave their buildings to get to know the startup and the investment industries, ecosystems. The defense primes are very much more aligned with bureaucracy than they are with the nimble aspect of startup life. Yeah. But all of them depend upon each other, and really our democracies depend upon it. My background before I left TechCrunch was in information security, specifically endpoint security, which is like a phone or a laptop or something like that. And so when I left to work at TechCrunch, the Stuxnet virus had just been discovered, and we were realizing that it was the very first cyber warhead that existed and got out into the wild. And so if you've been paying attention, we've been at war with Russia for many, many years now. My husband was in Estonia back in 2007 when it was cyber attacked by Russia. Ukraine was brought to its knees back in 2014 by a cyber attack from Russia. This invasion of Ukraine is the latest move into a full-fledged war that people can actually recognize, but it is just the latest maneuver in an ongoing conflict that we're only just waking up to. Again, with the mission-driven hat on, my husband and I want to leave the ecosystem better connected, functioning better. It's not about sharing information, networking, thought leadership, but it's about distinct groups like the military, venture capital, startups, getting to know each other and understanding each other. Like that's also it. I get frustrated with how slowly some of the sectors move that we're trying to engage with, in terms of content and sponsorships and ticket sales, and how fast other sectors move. And he's always reminding me that this is about getting to know each other. Yeah. Being nimble on our side to respond to these various interest groups that we have available. So, or, who we want to participate. So, that's how I got back into it. It was not planned. I definitely I've never considered myself a founder. I've never been the idea person, but I'm more than happy to make other people's ideas work. But in this happened so organically and with so many of the right skill sets coming to meet in the right place that it just the answer was actually, why not? We need to be doing this for our democracy because we believe in that. I'm an American. He's a Brit. We have very strong roots in that and want to make sure that we're doing our part. If we're not serving actively in military, which neither of us are and neither of us will be, how can we do our part?
Wow. It's almost like we need to pause there too and just think about what you all just said, because, we're really digging into, there's always more behind why we do what we do. So any of our listeners, whatever career, point they are in their career, whatever path they've taken to get there, everybody, they're a human being and they always have a why. Why am I doing what I do? Some of it, and all those are valid reasons. It's like, oh, well, I'm good at this, or I'm passionate about this, or I really enjoy this aspect of it. But when you do hear about these kinds of events that come from a far broader why, like you're talking about fundamentals of society, like democracy and access to the things that make us live, or the dangers of society like war and military conflicts and things like that. And then to say, well, hey, we're going to build something here as a business and a conference that will address that. The word is wow. Just say, and I'm sure you feel like, yeah, wow. But so I really appreciate you sharing your why as what your why behind this, you and your husband, as to where this all came from, and knowing that it was very much about humans and people you knew and even the ones you don't, but recognizing there was a gap that can be filled, particularly with both of your mutual expertise in those areas. And with that, I want to ask, when you're talking about Resilience Conference, like someone comes up to you and say, well, Leslie, what are you doing these days? What do you tell people, as far as describing Resilience Conference, in a nutshell, as much as you can, because there's so much to cover to it. How do you describe what the conference is for and what it's meant to achieve for people?
Yeah. So we chose the name Resilience, and we're starting with defense and security, but resilience is a very wide topic, and it's got a very long runway in terms of the types of things that we can discuss. Yeah. So we're starting with defense and security, but, resilience is water. It's climate, it's supply chains, it's energy, it's democracy. It's about, how the fabric of society can actually function and continue to thrive. Like that's really, really it. And so everybody can relate to that. They can relate to that, which is really, really great. And eventually, we will tackle these more, the other subjects. But right now, like I said, because of the point in time in which we in the West find ourselves, like this is the themes that we want to investigate right now and kind of interrogate right now. I personally kind of had to adjust myself to be comfortable with the idea that we were talking about drones that would, kill people.
Right.
But also, I have a 5.5-year-old and I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make sure that he doesn't have to fight in a war. If he wants to be in the military, great. Excellent. We can discuss this in however many years, but I don't want him to have to be conscripted. I don't want him to have to go through something like what our, Ukrainian friends are having to go through. Yeah. That's why we're starting where we are. And the way that we've set it up is to be a niche conference that has a smaller number of attendees. So at Disrupt, I was very used to programming and producing 5,000 plus attendees in a variety of different markets. This one is bridging all NATO countries and allies, NATO partners and allies, with representation from Eastern Europe, Estonia, the Baltics, US, Ukraine, and the UK so far, also Germany. I'm going to be forgetting somebody, but that's where we've landed to date with room to add a few more, because all of those distinct perspectives really matter. Yeah. Like, the perspectives of people who live on a border with Russia are very different from a perspective of somebody in the States, right? But they all matter and they're all working toward the same end goal. And what's really interesting is the ones who are doing it really well are collaborating really well. So that's kind of the shape that we're in how we talk about it, is that it's going to be small, 300 to 350 people, no need for a networking app, right? Everybody's going to be right there, and doing it also in the style of a TechCrunch Disrupt. So no keynotes, no 7-person panels. This is very strange for some of the people that we're having on the at the conference. They're kind of confused at how we're setting this up, but a combination of industry and journalist moderators. Yeah. We want it to be part of the news. We want it to be useful for everybody who's there, even the journalists, to be able to build their sources and report on what's happening there, making news, breaking news, 25-minute panels, no more, really just snappy, but also diving deeper into breakout rooms so that people can continue the conversation, have Q&As, really engage more with the topics. And also, we internally say there is no green room. Everybody who's there deserves to be in a green room. So we're, making sure that everybody from like the head of the British Army to the person who runs the investment thesis of global resilience, General Catalyst, and, the CEO of Helsing are all going to be in the same room together, talking with the likes of me. Wow. So that's the vision. And that, that type of like democratization of access is really important to us.
I'm so keen. I'm learning more about it too. I mean, you've obviously given us a lot to think about too. It's definitely a very different kind of conference, and I would say too, it's now easy as you have described what it's intended to accomplish and draw that line all the way from back when you first started in events and when you were, helping TechCrunch, but you've really helped to paint the picture of how did you get from there to here? And why we have Resilience Conference today is largely because of your, not to be trite, but event experience. It's your own experience, your experience in events, your experience with events, your experience of seeing how events can alter trajectories and change perceptions. And so really appreciate you, sharing this with us too. I have a feeling a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, if someone were to, hey, you have unlimited funds or you win the lottery or something, and now you can go work on anything you want to work on. You probably have been describing something a lot of our listeners would be like, I'd love to put my energy into that. So you're kind of living the dream. I'm sure it's challenging because at any time you start up anything, it is, but what an amazing mission to come into life. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me talk about it. I feel it's very dear to my heart and also causing lots of sleepless nights. So,
well, yeah, you're building
just like a child.
Exactly. You're building something brand new. And then lastly, our most Important question, and the easiest question of all. Where can our listeners find and follow you online?
Super. I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days, which is my name. Leslie Hitchcock is my handle there. I'm at LSH on Twitter, but I'm not really active on that anymore. And then I periodically post on Medium at LSH as well.
Excellent. And then is Resilience Conference anywhere we can find it online?
Yes, we are. I should have plugged that. We are resilienceconference.io. And we're also on LinkedIn. That's where we're having the most feedback, which is really fun.
Leslie's Skill Up advice encourages every event professional to reach out for inspiration.
I thought about this, and then I thought about what I've done. Find somebody whose either brand or event you admire and follow them and reach out to them. I'm not that shy, so I have no problem just doing a cold outreach. And I also really like it when people do that with me. I met recently with somebody who spent some time at another tech conference and is now doing comms and brand work for a VC and just wanted to talk to me about my experience. And, I'm probably 20 years older than her, and I had a great time chatting with her. But also, I find aspects of events that speak to me, other events. And I note it down. I also know what doesn't speak to me. I sometimes find that more than I do what speaks to me. But my dirty secret as an events person is that I really don't enjoy going to events. But when I do, I'm always on the lookout for things that I can get inspiration from and people that I can get inspiration from. I really admire what the information is built and what Kara Swisher built with All Things D, which that ages me because it's definitely not called that anymore. And then watching, how she's branched out into other medium, but how it all goes back into that really important work that she does. And so, to me, I take a lot of inspiration from others, and you just never know what will happen if you reach out to them and ask to just be in touch, not even like to go get a coffee, but just to be in touch. I think that people are often shy to do that, but I know from my experience, I love it when people do because it invigorates me, and I always learn from them as well. Like, what are they up to? So that's my one piece of advice for people.
Thanks again to Leslie Hitchcock-Stone for joining us on Event Experience, and thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear it. Connect with us on social and subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. Also, don't forget to share the show with your colleagues and friends. You can find transcripts of each episode and key takeaways on bizzabo.com/podcast. On behalf of the team, thank you. We'll gather again soon for a new episode of Event Experience.